Okay, so this is going to be our fourth subject-verb agreement lesson. We've done basic remembering that the subject and verb have to agree in person and number. We've also done compound subjects, the rules we went over about subjects joined by and or by or, and we've covered indefinite pronouns as subjects. This fourth lesson is called Other Confusing Subjects, which means that it is the lesson where they threw everything that didn't fit in when it was focused. Yay! So, we have a number of things we'll be looking at today. The first is collective nouns. Now, if you think way back to elementary school when you were learning parts of speech, you'll remember you learned about nouns and verbs, and eventually one of the types of nouns you learned about was called a collective noun. Collective nouns are singular names for groups of people or things, like a flock or a herd or a team or a jury or a class. So, when we look at this, collective nouns show up in this chapter because they, like many other exceptions in English, are obnoxious when it comes to subject-verb agreement. So, the class is taking a test. Okay? Now, in this case, is our correct verb choice. Class is singular because the entire group, class, as a group, is completing one activity. If we were, however, to talk about you guys leaving, none of you, with the possible exception of the one class where I have siblings, go to the same place when you go home. You each go to your own home. So, if I were to refer to the class as a unit and say, after you had left the building, that you are going home, I would say the class are going home. Okay, so we swee the switch there. We see the switch there as class takes on a different meaning. Which means that, similar to a few of the things we've talked about in other chapters this year, collective nouns are singular or plural depending on how they're being used. When we are referring to the group as a whole, acting together, the class is taking a test, then the collective noun is singular. If we refer to the group as individuals, they're no longer working together, okay? They're going their different ways. The class are going home. Another example, you could say the jury is eating lunch. The trial stops and the whole jury goes and eat lunch. That's what they're all doing. However, if they are fighting about the verdict during deliberation, it would be the jury are arguing, because now they're not working as a group. They're debating with each other. They're arguing and fighting. Okay? So, that is collective nouns. Okay? And we summarize it by saying when they all work together, it's one thing. It's singular. When the members of the group are not acting as one. For example, a herd of cattle that separates and just all goes different directions. The class are, okay? It's going to be plural. All right, the next piece that they talk to us about in this lesson moves to phrases and clauses. We've seen phrases and clauses turn up all over the place this year. We talked about infinitives, we talked about gerunds and others. Any phrase that can function as a noun, or for that matter, any clause that can function as a noun, can be the subject of a sentence. For example, to have grown 6-foot fingernails is gross? Don't you think so? I remember I lived in Germany and they had this children's story about a character who had nails so long that they curved in circles and like came back around. Just, ugh, never quite forgot that one. So, but in this case, notice that this entire group of words, this entire infinitive phrase, to have grown 6-foot fingernails, is our subject. It is the thing that is gross. Okay, so here we have the phrase is the subject. What is gross? This whole bunch of stuff. They are always singular. So, whenever you have a group of words, a phrase or clause, the verb is going to be singular. Okay? Now, we could put a clause up there, and it's not going to look any different. It might say, he who is going to do this must eat pancakes first. Okay? Now that's he is the subject. I totally messed that up. Let me think. Ah, gotcha. We're going to get this out of the way so I can stay somewhere near eye level on this thing as I put it together. Let me go with this. What is hard to believe, especially when he screws up like this, is that Mr. Lee actually knows. That looks like Moe's, doesn't it? We'll fix that. There we go. Knows what he is talking about. That went faster in my head. Writing it down took longer than I thought it would. In any case, what is hard to believe? Okay? If we remember our clauses, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. Here's our subject, here's our verb. Now in this case, what is hard to believe is functioning as the subject of this sentence. And notice, like we said with the phrase, the group of words, what is hard to believe, which is collectively the subject of the larger sentence, is going to bring us to a singular verb. Okay, so two different spots now. We had the collective nouns, like herd, or team, or class, or jury, and they are singular or plural based on whether they are working together or whether they are splitting up and working individually. Our second one was phrases or clauses, both of which, by the way, are collective nouns because they are names for groups of words. And phrases or clauses, when they function as a subject, are always singular. Okay? So they're always singular. If we did it in the past tense, it would be was, and so on. Although, we'd have to change this one too, because what is hard to believe was, yeah, sounds sketchy. All right, couple more. I'm finding out that I am going to run out of time here. But we'll see what we can get done. So, clear this off. The next of our our 5 confusing subjects is very, very simple. Occasionally in English, because what would an English lesson be without an exception to make things less logical and more difficult, right? Occasionally in English we have nouns that are singular, but just to be obnoxious, they end in S. I think they did this just because it's normal to put an S on the end of a noun to make it plural. I am convinced that It's a conspiracy on the part of the nouns to confuse people. But regardless, if we're going to write correctly, we have to be able to recognize that some nouns, like mathematics or social studies, actually works for a number of courses or subject names for school. Okay. These name one thing, a field of study, but they end in S. They are singular. Okay, so they would take a singular verb. When you think of nouns like this that end in S but take a singular verb, nouns that end in S but are singular, mathematics is one thing, then if that is one thing, then even though it ends in S, you're going to need a singular verb. As I told many of you, and I think each class when we were doing the compound subjects, don't cue on the S's. They will confuse you, they will throw you off, they're irrelevant. What you need to do is to look at the subject and say, okay, is there one of these or more than one of these? And that will indicate to you what the verb is going to be. Okay, two more. The next two represent, one, a use of pronouns. So we preview next chapter when we do using pronouns. And the other is the English class equivalent of algebra. When you hit algebra, they introduce the alphabet into math. We're going to introduce some numbers into our sentences and talk about how they fit. Okay? So when you have an amount, say 11 years is your subject, or half the bread, or something like that, okay? You have a numerical amount or measurement. These numerical amounts almost always look like plurals. After all, if you say 11 years, it means that 11 periods of time, called a year, have passed, and that's what you're talking about. However, the number represents a quantity. It's all of them together that make it 11 years. And 11 is one thing, not 11 things, when we're looking at it by itself. So, for the purposes of grammar, if I were to say 17 years is the average age of my students, and I don't know if that's true of you guys or not. I don't know how many of you are 16 and how many of you are 17 or where it's ended. Average age of my students. Notice my verb there after 17 years is, because we're looking at a quantity as a whole. Okay? The number 17, in this case we're talking about a time period, 17 years is the average age of my students. So, even if the number is more than one, don't let it throw you off, okay? It's going to be singular. Now then, fractions function differently. It's a different question. When you have a fraction of something, it's like the swinging indefinite pronouns we talked about. I told you that when you look at the indefinite pronouns that can be both singular and plural, you had to look at all of what, none of what, most of what, in order to determine whether to choose the singular verb or the plural verb. In this case, fractions work the same way. So if we have 1/2, well, is that singular or plural? Depends on half of what. So in this first example, it's going to be plural. Half the cars were damaged. Okay, notice, half the cars is plural. This is our key moment for the fraction. Half of what? Half the cars. So, cars were. Half the cars were. Now, if I did the same sentence, this one's going to be singular. If I did the same sentence, and my key word here, half of what? Half of the car, this word is singular, then we're going to switch it. The verb is going to be singular. Half the car was damaged. All right? And this applies to any fractional amount. Half the work was done. Half the problems were done. Half the kids pay attention. Half the kids, yes, that's plural. Half the class, singular in this case, pays attention. Okay? So, there we are. When you work with numbers, whole numbers, remember we talked about 17 years? Whole numbers are 17 years. We're going to do it this way because what I'm saying would be plural, but what I'm writing would be singular. 17 years is singular, and so is any other whole number amount, grammatically. Fractions switch. There we go, switch. It's kind of switch. It looks like a D, but it'll do. Switch. Fractions switch. And how do we know they switch? We have to ask a fraction of what? Okay? If what is singular, then the verb of that subject will be, of that sentence will be singular. If what is plural, the verb will be plural. Okay, deep breath. Whew. All right, we've done 4, we have 1 more. Our 5th confusing subject that has been tossed into this 4th lesson is relative pronouns. Now, we are not doing a pronoun lesson. Therefore, we're not going to worry about exactly what relative pronouns mean. We can worry about that at another time. What it means for us at the moment is the words I am going to list here. There are 3 relative pronouns in English. They are who, which, and that. If you remember our clauses chapter, these are also subordinating conjunctions, okay? They indicate that a subordinate clause is coming. And that's generally where relative pronouns function. With relative pronouns, with a relative pronoun as subject, I'm going to abbreviate that, it's subject. As subject, you have to check its antecedent. Okay, so if who is taking the place of you, whichever student you are listening to this at the moment, then it is singular because there's just one of you. If who is taking the place of the baseball team, or the Clippers, or the student body of Peyton Junior Senior High School, then it's going to be plural because who is replacing a plural noun. Okay, so I'm going to give you some, we've given the theory, let me do one sentence as an example, and then we're done. And we'll follow up in class. I'll take your questions, we'll do some comprehension check, and then we'll have an activity for you to do. There. So, in this sentence, which I'm going to borrow from the book, Della Gray is a British ballerina who, there's there's our relative pronoun, okay, who, come back over here where I have room, is famous. And we're going to stop the sentence there because when you heard that bell ring in the background, that means that my prep period is over and I'm out of time to record this. So we'll cut the sentence short. Della Gray is a British ballerina who is famous. How do I know that who is singular? Well, who represents Della Gray. And Della Gray, however awesome she might be, is only one person. So, who is famous? Now, if we said Della and Stella and Fella Gray are ballerinas, then the sentence would change and it would read who are famous. Okay? So we have collective nouns, could be team or herd or school or class, okay? And they are singular if they're all working together, or plural if they're splitting up and working on their own. We talked about groups of words, phrases, and clauses, and they are always singular when they are subjects. We talked about nouns that end in S. Basically, the rule is some nouns that end in S are still singular. Don't depend on the S when you're doing subject-verb agreement. It will just confuse you. Numerical amounts and titles, whole numbers, singular. Fractions, depends. Fraction of what? If the what is singular, your verb is singular. If the what is plural, your verb is plural. And then finally, relative pronouns. We got to look at what they're referring to. Since who in this sentence refers to Della Gray and she is one person, it is singular. If we had who, which, or that and it referred to multiple people, it would be plural. There you are, guys. See you Monday.